You know that one patch by your mailbox, the thin, tired spot that never greens up no matter what you dump on it. You water it, you feed it, you keep paying the service, and it keeps mocking you. Here is what took me years to accept. That lawn doesn't need another $40 bag of fertilizer. It needs one cheap powder that costs about $2, and it does something no product on that store shelf can do at the same time. I take no sponsors, no affiliate money. Nobody pays me to say any of this. I just found a thing that works, and I'm handing it over the fence. Because a turfgrass scientist at a public university stumbled onto this by accident in the late 1980s, and the measured results stopped me cold. The first time I sprinkled it on the bare strip along my back fence, I honestly expected nothing. 3 weeks later, that strip was the greenest thing in my yard, and the crabgrass that came back every single June just didn't. And no, this isn't a trick for fresh sod. This works on the beat-up, established lawn you already own. Stay with me, because what this stuff actually is will surprise you. Let me back up, because I need you to understand why I doubted this so hard. For about 9 years, I paid a lawn service. Nice guys, honest enough. They came 4 times a season, dragged a hose across my yard, and left a little flag by the driveway. My bill ran close to $450 a year. Some of my neighbors paid more like $600. And here's the thing that gnawed at me. My lawn was fine. Just fine. Never great. The weeds always found a way back. The color faded by August. Every spring, I got the same speech about a program, and every spring I wrote the same check. Now, I want to be careful here, because I'm not going to stand over the fence and tell you everybody in the industry is a crook. Most aren't. But somebody somewhere profits from you believing that a green lawn is complicated, that it requires a chemistry set and a subscription, that you could never do it yourself. That belief is the product, not the fertilizer. The belief, because when I finally sat down and read what was actually in those bags, I realized I was mostly paying for one thing: nitrogen wrapped in marketing and a truck. And the powder I'm going to name at the end of this delivers nitrogen too. Real nitrogen, about 10% of its weight is nitrogen, which is right in the range of a lot of commercial lawn foods. But that's only half of what it does. And the other half is the part that made a university file a patent. Therefore, I had to know, how does one $2 kitchen powder do the job of 2 separate products at once? Let me tell you what the fertilizer bag doesn't want you thinking about. When you feed a lawn, you're not really feeding the grass. You're feeding the soil, and the soil feeds the grass. That distinction sounds small. It's everything. Most synthetic fertilizers are fast nitrogen. They hit hard. The grass shoots up dark green in about a week, and you feel like a genius. Then it burns off. The color fades. The soil life underneath the fungi, the microbes, the earthworms that actually build good dirt gets nothing. So you're back in 3 or 4 weeks, feeding again, chasing that same green. That's the treadmill. It's designed to keep you buying. This powder works the opposite way. It breaks down slowly. It feeds the grass over weeks, not days. And while it's doing that, it's feeding the living soil underneath. I noticed my dirt getting darker and softer after the first season. Springier under my boots. Worms I hadn't seen in years. And here's the clue I promised you. This powder didn't start out as a lawn product at all. It's a byproduct, a leftover from making something people eat every single day in this country. For decades, it was treated as animal feed, worth almost nothing, sold by the ton. Nobody looked at it and thought, lawn, until one scientist noticed something strange happening in a petri dish. But before I get to him, I need to show you the part that turns this from a nice tip into something that genuinely feels buried. Because feeding your grass is only the first job. The second job is the one that stunned me, and it's the reason a public university locked this down with a patent in the early 1990s. Think about what you actually pay a lawn service to do in spring. It isn't just the green up, it's the pre-emergent. That early season treatment that stops crabgrass and other weed seeds from taking over before they ever sprout. That's the expensive visit. That's the one they schedule with such urgency, like you'll lose the whole yard if you miss the window. This powder does that too. not by poisoning anything. It works on the weed seed at the exact moment it's most vulnerable, right? When the seed sprouts and sends out its first tiny root, this powder interrupts that first root from forming properly. The seed germinates, reaches out, and can't establish. It dries up before it ever becomes a weed, you'd notice. So sit with that for a second. One powder, $2. It feeds your grass like a fertilizer, and it stops weeds like a pre-emergent, the two things you're paying separately for right now. I remember standing in my driveway the first June, it worked, staring at the strip along my fence where crabgrass had won every year since we moved in. It was clean, just grass. I actually crouched down and pushed the blades apart looking for it because I didn't trust my own eyes. Now here's the honest catch. Because I promised you honest, it doesn't know the difference between a weed seed and a grass seed. It stops both from rooting. So there's a right way and a wrong way to use it, and timing is everything. I'll walk you through that. Therefore, the question isn't whether it works. The measured research says it does. The question is how a leftover this cheap stayed off your radar for 30 years. And that's where the story gets good. Let me take you back to a research greenhouse in Iowa in the late 1980s. There was a turfgrass professor at Iowa State University named Nick Christians. He wasn't hunting for a weed killer. He was actually running tests on disease in grass. He'd spread a certain organic material across some test plots as part of the experiment, and he expected the grass to grow normally. Instead, he noticed something odd. Wherever he'd applied this material, the grass seed he was trying to establish wouldn't take. The seedlings kept failing to root. Most people would have called that a nuisance and moved on. He didn't. He asked the better question, if this stuff is stopping seeds from rooting, could it stop weed seeds from rooting on purpose? That flipped a failure into a discovery. Through the late 80s and into the early 1990s, his lab ran trial after trial. The results held up. The material suppressed weeds like crabgrass and dandelion at germination, and because it was roughly 10% nitrogen, the established grass around it greened up beautifully. Iowa State pursued a patent on it as a natural pre-emergent herbicide, a university, a patent, on a farm byproduct that had been sitting in feed sacks for a century. That's not folklore. That's not some tip your uncle swears by. That's documented research from one of the most respected turf programs in the country, and once I read Christian's work, I couldn't unknow it. But here's what bothered me. If a real university proved this in the early 1990s, why had I never once heard it from the guys dragging a hose across my yard? Why wasn't it on the front of every bag? I think you already know why. There's not much margin in telling people the cheap thing works. Therefore, let me answer the question I know you're forming right now, because I formed it too. You might be thinking, that's fine for Iowa, that's fine for research plots and fresh seed, but my lawn's been here 15 years. It's established. It's got history. It's got bare spots and stubborn weeds and compacted clay. Does any of this actually apply to the yard I'm standing on? Before I show you exactly how to use it on your established lawn, I want to mention something that made all of this click for me in a much deeper way. I put together everything I've learned, the research, the timing, the seasonal routine, the mistakes I made so you don't have to, into a book called Lawn Fixed. And there's also a companion guide called Deep Roots that goes into the soil science underneath all of this. If you've ever felt like the lawn industry was speaking a language designed to keep you confused and dependent, these books are written for exactly that feeling. You can find them in the description below. They're the resource I wish I'd had at the start before I wasted 3 seasons chasing the wrong answers. Now, back to the practical side, because this next part is for you specifically, the person who almost clicked away because you assumed this was a new lawn trick. It isn't. And here's how I use it on a lawn that's already grown in with nothing but a bag and my own 2 hands. First, forget any idea that you need special equipment. You don't need a professional spreader. You don't need a service. I've applied this by hand, tossing it across the lawn the way you'd feed chickens, and I've used a $10 handheld crank spreader from the hardware store. Both worked. The rate that matches the research is right around 20 pounds for every 1,000 square feet. Most suburban front lawns are somewhere between 2 and 5,000 square feet, so you can measure yours off in your head pretty quick. Walk it, count your steps. Close enough is close enough here. This is forgiving. Timing is the one thing you can't fudge, and this is where most people go wrong. because it stops seeds from rooting, you apply it in early spring before the soil warms up and the weed seeds wake up. The old rule the extension folks use is to put it down around the time the forsythia bloom, those bright yellow bushes that flower before anything else. When you see forsythia, it's time. That's your natural calendar. No app, no flag on your driveway. Water it in lightly after you spread it. A short drink, then let it dry. That little bit of moisture activates it, and then the dry spell keeps the weed seeds from getting the steady wetness they'd need to overpower it. Now, here's the existing lawn move that took me a couple seasons to figure out. If your lawn is thin and you want to overseed to thicken it up, you cannot use this powder at the same time. Remember, it stops your good grass seed from rooting too. So you split the year, you overseed in the fall, let that new grass mature all through winter and into spring, and then the following early spring, you start using this as your weed and feed. After that, twice a year, spring and fall, keeps the weeds knocked back and the color deep. For a truly beat-up lawn, the first season is about breaking the weed cycle and feeding the soil. The second season is when your neighbors start asking what you're doing differently. Mine did. A guy 3 houses down actually pulled over in his truck to ask, and I just pointed at the bag. But even with all of that working, I hit a wall the first year, a mistake that almost made me quit on the whole thing. And I want you to avoid it, because it's the difference between this working and this doing nothing at all. Here's the mistake. The first spring, I got impatient, and I bought the cheapest, coarsest version of this powder I could find in the big, chunky pellet form. I spread it, I waited, and my weeds came up anyway. I was ready to write the whole idea off as internet nonsense. Then I went back and actually read Christian's numbers again, and I found my error. The form matters. The finer, more powdered version releases its weed-stopping compounds faster and more evenly across the soil surface. The coarse, chunky stuff can work, but it breaks down slower and unevenly, and if your timing's even a little off, the weeds beat it. The powder is the workhorse. That's why I keep calling it a powder, not pellets. And there's a second thing about the numbers that surprised me. The research showed the weed suppression gets better over multiple years. Year 1, you might see 30% fewer weeds. Keep at it, and by the 3rd or 4th year, the suppression can climb well past 60% because you're steadily draining the weed seed bank in your soil while never adding fast chemical nitrogen that stresses everything out. It compounds. It's like the opposite of the treadmill. Every year you do less, not more. Try getting that from a bag that's engineered to run out in 3 weeks, so you buy another one. Now think about the money, because this is the part that made me a little angry once I did the math. My service ran about $450 a year. A single application of this powder across a normal front lawn runs a few dollars if you buy it in bulk from a feed store, and even the pricier garden center bags come in far under what one professional visit costs. I figure I've saved well over $1,000 across 3 seasons, and my lawn looks better than it ever did on the program. But this powder does one more thing that no fertilizer bag will ever brag about, and it's the piece that finally made me trust it completely. It's safe around the things that actually live in your yard. I've got a dog, big, dumb, lovable, and he eats grass like it's his job. Every spring on the old program, I'd read the label, see the warnings, and keep him off the lawn for a day or two, hoping he wouldn't lick his paws. That little knot of worry in my gut every treatment. This powder doesn't come with that knot. It's food-derived. It's the same base material that ends up in feed and in things on your own kitchen shelf. Kids can play on it. The dog can roll in it. The birds can pick at it, and they're fine. There's no re-entry warning, no keep off until dry, no little skull on the corner of the bag, and that changed how I feel walking my own yard. It stopped being a chemical zone I managed from a distance and went back to being the place my family actually uses. That's worth something the fertilizer companies never put a price on. Therefore, let me pull the whole picture together before I finally tell you what this is. Because when the name lands, I want you to already understand exactly why it's been kept quiet. Here's everything this one powder does. It feeds your grass slow-release nitrogen, about 10% by weight, so you get deep, lasting green instead of a 2-week flash. It stops weed seeds from rooting in early spring, doing the job of a pre-emergent. It feeds the living soil, so your dirt gets richer every year instead of more dependent. It gets more effective the longer you use it, not less. It costs a couple of dollars instead of a couple hundred, and it's safe enough that your dog can nap on it an hour after you spread it. One product, every job, and it was discovered by accident by a scientist who wasn't even looking for it, then locked behind a patent and left to sit while the store shelves filled up with everything except the simple answer. So here it is. The powder I've been circling this entire time, it's corn gluten meal. That's it. Corn gluten meal, a plain yellow byproduct left over when corn is milled into starch and syrup. For most of the last century, it was nothing but cheap livestock feed stacked in sacks at the mill, worth almost nothing. It came from the same corn that's in half the food in your pantry. And it was Nick Christians at Iowa State University who, in the late 1980s, watched grass seed, refused to root in his disease test plots, and realized this humble feed byproduct was quietly acting as a natural pre-emergent. His lab confirmed it through the early 1990s, and the university patented corn gluten meal as an organic weed preventer. 10% nitrogen, real weed suppression, a byproduct nobody wanted, turned into the one thing every lawn actually needs. You can buy it at a feed store, a farm supply store, or a garden center. Ask for corn gluten meal, the fine powdered form, not the coarse pellets. 20 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Put it down when the forsythia bloom in spring. Water it in once, then let it dry. Do it again in the fall, and watch what happens over the next 2 or 3 years as your weeds thin out and your color deepens and your soil comes back to life. That's the whole secret. It existed the entire time. It got buried under expensive bags and monthly programs and the quiet, profitable idea that your lawn was too complicated for you to handle. But a few people kept using it anyway, the ones who read the research instead of the label, and now you're one of them. So the truth is, you were never really behind on your lawn. You were just being sold the long way around, something that cost $2. You strike me as the kind of homeowner who doesn't like being handled. Who'd rather know how a thing works than keep writing checks to a guy with a hose and a flag? That instinct you had, the one that made you click this, that instinct was right the whole time. Now I want to hear from you. Tell me down in the comments, what's the one spot in your yard that's beaten you every single year? The strip by the driveway, the shady patch under the tree, the corner where the crabgrass always wins? Name that spot for me. Leave it in a comment right now because I read them and I want to know exactly what you're fighting before you put the corn gluten meal down this spring. And if you're done being overcharged for your own grass, come stand on this side of the fence with the rest of us. Subscribing here isn't about supporting some channel, it's about joining a bunch of ordinary homeowners who quietly refuse to be overcharged for a patch of dirt we already own. Because the next thing I'm going to show you is another $2 item, this one from the pharmacy, not the kitchen that fixes the exact yellow-green color problem corn gluten meal alone won't touch. It's sitting on a shelf you've walked past 100 times. I'll see you in that one. I stopped here for a reason. Inside the Honest Lawn Circle, I pick up right where this video ended, walking you through the full soil feeding program. Get stuck? You ask me directly, and a real person answers, never a machine. You won't be doing it alone. Thousands of lawn keepers are already in there with me. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel anytime. If this helped your lawn, why not subscribe and stay with me here? I've got plenty more simple, low-cost tips just like this one ready and waiting for you.